So one of the first things that we ran into, and this was a big one, it takes a lot longer to make an ad in HTML5 than it does in Flash. I mean, you just can't get around that. One of the big reasons for that is that with Flash, generally speaking, you could count on it to work relatively consistently across browsers. If it worked in browser A, chances are it was going to work in browser B and browser C and browser D. There were small variations in that occasionally, but generally you could count on that consistency. That is not the case with HTML5 creatives. There are features that work in one browser that are not supported in other. There's code that has to be written in different ways to work in different browsers. And this just adds to the scope of development. Any developer working on digital advertising has to be aware of the variability in browser support for HTML5 features from the beginning. And as they're developing, they have to keep that in mind. What that means is that they have to have an understanding of the browsers that they need to develop for, the versions of those browsers that they need to develop for. Once you add mobile to the equation, then you're talking about the devices that those browsers are going to be on, and HTML behaves differently across in browsing environments on different mobile devices. So it really just explodes the scope of your development. So when we first encountered this, we communicated to our clients that this is going to take 1.5 times longer to develop an ad in HTML5 than it does in Flash. And honestly, that was a really, 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 really aggressive number. But you can't really communicate to a client. You can't really say to a client in any reasonable way, this is going to take 3 to 4 times as long to do your ad. Like it doesn't matter to them that the technology has changed. It matters to them that their bottom lines and their deadlines are going to be affected because you're taking 3 times as long to do their work. So we had to figure out strategies to maintain the rigidity of testing that is necessary to do good work in the digital advertising field in HTML5, but also find efficiencies in other places so we could keep that development time down. Of course, vastly expanded QA scope is also part of this equation. If you're talking about having to run banners across multiple environments, you have to test them across multiple environments. This means that your QA teams have to have machines that have multiple operating systems on them, that have multiple browsers and different versions of those browsers. When you add mobile to that, they also have to have dev machines that have multiple operating systems, multiple browsers. This, of course, increases the cost for QA. It increases the time for QA. And you can't really get around that. You cannot say, I'm not going to QA these units across every environment that they can potentially run in any reasonable way. Like that's just not going to fly. If they break, that is your responsibility. So we do have strategies to mitigate this as well, and I'm going to get to that in the next section. Loss of standardization is also something that has been a big challenge for us. In the Flash era, you knew what you were getting into. A standard banner was 30K, it was 40K. A rich banner, the distinction between that and the standard unit was very clear. You knew what was happening. It was a very level, very set, understood playing field. That has changed. I remember in the very early days of developing for HTML5, we reached out to one of our publishing partners and we said, hey, we have a banner ad coming down the line. It's going to be HTML5. What is your spec for that? And they came back to us and they said, it's going to be 40K. And we said, oh, no. That's your Flash spec. What's your HTML5 spec for that? And they said, it's going to be 40K. And that just doesn't work for us. If 40K in the HTML5 world is a very different experience than 40K in the Flash world. Flash had built-in optimizations, built-in compressions. We did some research and calculations on our part, and we figured out that for a comparable banner experience in HTML5, for a 40K banner, you need 150 to 200K. And during the early days, having that conversation with publishers was very difficult. There was no standardization. There remains no standardization. That is set in stone. Luckily, the IAB has stepped in, and they have published standards that I think people are really responding to positively. The numbers work for us as creative agencies, and it is good to be able to point to those numbers and say, hey guys, this is what the IAB has suggested as the spec. can you please help align with us on that? And that's worked out a lot. So some solutions and strategies to these problems and some lessons learned. One of the most important things has been communication. I mean, you hear that all the time, but I can't overemphasize the importance of that. We knew that the change was coming from Flash to HTML for a while, and we had been preparing for it, but there was no real deadline in place. You know, everyone just knew it was coming. It was the impending banner apocalypse, but who knew the date, right? And then the Chrome announcement happened, and all of a sudden, our emails exploded. You know, clients were like, what is going on? How is this going to affect our buys? Everyone was freaking out, and the important thing to do here was to reach out to everyone and take responsibility as a creative agency and say, hey, we are going to act as the communication body here. We know what is happening here. It's nothing to freak out about. We know that this is what the creative agencies have to do to make this work. This is what the clients need to know to make this work. This is what our media partners need to know. And so we facilitated conversations with our media partners, with our ad partners. We wrote white papers that we shared with our clients, and we said, this is what the new landscape looks like. It's nothing to get excited about. We're handling it. These are the things that you have to do to help us approach this. And once everyone understood what their new role was in this new world, they calmed down. I think that once that miasma of uncertainty had faded away, everyone had a clear goal, it was easier to move forward in a constructive way. The next thing, and can I see a show of hands for all the creative agencies in the room? Okay. The other thing I think which is important here is you have to take responsibility for being the expert as this landscape evolves. There are lots of solutions across lots of different partners while we're still waiting for the landscape to settle down as far as specs go. And you have to know what those solutions are.